Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first conversations with the clerk for the summer and fall of 2023 as we start talking about some changes to the Book of Order and how they affect the work that we do in the church along the way. So this evening we'll start with a word of prayer and then do some introductions, and then I'll kind of give you an outline of this being the first of several conversations, and then get into our topic for this evening, which is the new Book of Order, the big picture. There's a version of this slideshow that has the book turning pages for us, but I don't have that one on right now. But I'm so glad that you're with us. Thanks for joining us this evening. Let's open with a word of prayer. Loving God, we thank you for the gift of your church, the privilege that we have of serving you along the way, and the new possibilities that we can see when we come together by the power of your Spirit. Open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts, that together tonight we might know how you are calling your church to be, what you are calling your church to do, and how we can be more faithful each and every day as we serve you together in this Presbyterian Church USA and the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta and all of our congregations along the way. Thank you for your presence with us, for all of these faithful servants and their commitment to you and to your church. And be with us this evening. Through Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. So we'll start out this evening with a quick round of introductions. Well, I will warn you all, I raided the shelves in my office this afternoon, and I discovered you'll see some of these references earlier, the Book of Church Order from 1977 and a 1981-82 edition as well. And then the first copy of the Book of Order post-reunion from 86 that we had at the office. And I have gotten rid of most of my collection. I think they live at the office now, and my collection does kind of, I don't have that first one. It has graciously passed on into the recycle bin. So I've tried to kind of narrow them down. There's probably the most important one might be the 2009 Book of Order, pre-New Form of Government, that to have a backup copy of, and some of these older ones from just around reunion. So anyway, I have a little collection, but thank you for your introductions and for sharing kind of what makes you interested about being here, because I think it is we are a unique crowd, and I'm so glad that we can share this time and learn a little bit together and get to know each other a little better from the questions we're asking. So I want to just kind of give you an overview of our sessions here, because tonight is the first in several sessions, and we want to, you probably saw this when you signed up, that there are 4 sessions total. Tonight, we're talking about the big picture, kind of give you an overview of the changes. And then at the end of August, we'll talk about the new policies and procedures and manual items that need to be done for sessions. And around October 3rd, we'll get to new requirements for pastors and their congregations. That's a lot of stuff like the family leave policy will come up then. And then on November 7th, we'll talk about the new church discipline. But I want to tonight give you an overview so you know kind of what we're talking about in each one of these, and maybe you can decide which of those you want to attend in the weeks ahead. So, but the overview kind of has to start by imagining our polity desktop. So back before I was born, most of us in the church could walk into a meeting or try to sort through questions about Presbyterian polity with a single book, the Book of Church Order, if in the Southern Stream. In the Northern Stream, there was the Book of Order and the Book of Confessions, but you still kind of had just 2 books. And then all of a sudden at reunion, we actually added not only the Book of Confessions, but also Robert's Rules of Order. Now, Robert's Rules is so ingrained in us, you would expect, this may be a little bit of a surprise to you, but as best I can tell, now, in the Southern Presbyterian Church, and probably in the Northern as well, there was no reference to Robert's Rules until after reunion. It was only in the Book of Order. It was added to the Book of Order at the time of reunion that Robert's Rules would be used to describe how we work. So that kind of means we now need 3 books on our desktop for polity. And we and all along the way, there's also been something you might have heard about, something called the Annotated Book of Order, which is the Book of Order that that adds in all of the different interpretations over the years. And so as time went on, there was a growing movement to introduce greater flexibility for presbyteries and congregations. So the Book of Order started to require a manual of operations, first of all for the presbytery. So everybody above the session had to have this manual of operations. If I move my head, you can see this is the 2005 Book of Order behind me there. So this would have been the Book of Order at the time I was ordained. I probably have a copy of it somewhere if I didn't send it to the recycle bin. So about that, there was this interest in being more flexible. And then came 2011 with that green Book of Order that people talked about for a long time. That cover was very brightly colored, but that's the moment that we suddenly also required a manual of operations for the session as well as the presbytery. This did reduce the size of the book. If you look at the old book, it was probably about 1.5 inches thick. After 2011, it dropped to just under 1 inch. Took a lot of pages out, but it also meant you now have all of these different things floating around on your desk when you're trying to be in a meeting. It added a lot of flexibility for presbyteries and sessions to adapt policies to their own best practices. And over time, the Book of Order has become more explicit about what has to go in the manual of operations. And so part of that is why I'm going over this tonight. This may seem very basic and repetitive, but so many of these amendments this year are dealing with operational matters and helping and saying, this is what you need to put in your manual of operations. So our polity desktop right now has all of these different documents. And they are all in play in different ways along the way. So you have the Constitution, the Book of Order, and the Book of Confessions. You always have that annotated version of the Book of Order that kind of gives you some additional detail about certain elements. You have Robert's Rules that tell you how to run a meeting. And then you have the manuals of operation. And sometimes that also includes directives from the presbytery to the session. And then you may even have other policies along the way that don't show up there. So when someone calls me to say, tell me how we need to elect our elders in our church, I say, check your manual of operations, because all of that's in there. They expect me to point them to a Book of Order citation, but we just don't function that way anymore. Getting answers about the proper way to do things just gets more and more complicated along the way. And hopefully it's not too complicated. It is unfortunate, the level of complexity that shows up sometimes, but if we want the flexibility that we have, we may have to suffer through a little bit of this along the way. Before I go on and start talking about a few of the specific changes and give an overview of the amendments, are there any questions about our polity desktop as I've described it? Anyone? Well, let me just kind of start giving you a quick overview of the amendments that we have approved and that are in the new Book of Order. I've kind of put them into 5 different categories. And we'll have some of these we will have a whole session on. Some of these we're not going to talk about at all. The worship changes I've not made plans to talk about because those are relatively minor. Martha may disagree with me, but she and I can have a conversation. Maybe we have a joint conversation as the next conversations with the clerk after these about those. But the different, so some of these categories, these are my categories, and I will share with you this presentation. So don't feel like you have to scribble down everything. I'll send you an email after tonight that has a copy of this for your records and another document as well that I'll tell you a little bit about. But I just kind of class these into these categories. The foundational changes. These are things that are substantial changes to key language and or the practice of the church. Then there are some changes that are practical, that are going to have implications for most congregations. There are a few changes that are highly technical. They have a very limited application and scope. One of them is very particular about allowing synods to elect additional commissioners for purposes of representation. It needed to be in there to allow for that. It's the only way that we could make that happen, but it's a highly technical change with a very limited application. There are a number of changes connected to sexual misconduct prevention and response. And these are very important. They kind of fit into, they tend to be pretty technical, but they are incredibly important, and they are also somewhat in that practical level as well, because things will need to change based on that. And then, as I said, there's about 6 or 8 amendments related to the directory for worship. None of them will change what you do on an average or not so average Sunday morning, but kind of open up some different possibilities for a couple of things. So I'm going to dive right into these foundational amendments, first of all. The first of these, I put 2 together. There are 2 amendments to the foundations section of the Book of Order, that those first 3 chapters that are marked with F. These are in the first chapter, and there's some changes to the language that's designed to expand inclusive language with reference to gender identity in there. And it does add a couple of, I believe it also adds some different understandings of an additional words. So these also add reference to differing abilities as well. So it not only changes male and female to all people, but it talks about differing abilities to bring in some of that. A foundational change is, this is very technical, but it is very foundational in that we have made a requirement of a minimum of 12 weeks of paid family leave in the terms of call for all installed pastors and associate pastors. This is foundational in the sense that the only other thing like this is that an installed pastor or associate pastor has to be enrolled in the pension plan. And so that is a pretty big deal to add this requirement there. One thing I will go ahead and counsel at this moment, as I have done with anyone who's asked, it is not necessary to call a congregational meeting and then for sometime in the next month to add this to your pastor's terms of call. But be sure that it is included the next time you make changes to your pastor's terms of call. It needs to be explicitly stated there. The Committee on Ministry is working to define what paid family medical leave is, as is described in the amendment, and any other requirements that the presbytery is going to attach to that. I expect that process will be complete probably in September or October in time, and which will hopefully give everyone plenty of time to plan for that in their updates to terms of call for next calendar year. Another foundational change is the addition of an anti-racism policy to the policies required of councils. There's clarifications about other language in that list, and there was another amendment to that as well that added a harassment policy to the list, but harassment kind of fits in some of the pieces that were already there. Anti-racism is a whole new type of policy for us as a church, and this is a requirement that is necessary for every council of the church, session, presbytery, synod, and general assembly. So we are working with the Dismantling Racism or Racial Healing Committee of the Presbytery to create some model policies that might be adapted by sessions for their congregation. And we'll be working on one for the presbytery as well. So, and again, this is not something you need to pass in the next month. When it comes to these policy changes, I'm suggesting to most churches, take a deep breath, get this right. Don't rush it, but do it right. And if you can get the policy in place within the next 12 months, or certainly by the end of 2024, you will be in keeping with the spirit of this change, as far as I'm concerned. So, that again, don't stress it. If you're doing a broader review, Marcia, as you were describing for St. Andrews, do this as part of your broader review, but don't feel like you have to do it tomorrow, because it really is important to do well, not just fast. The other big foundational change is a complete overhaul and a newly written section on church discipline. So that is, if you look at, I just flipped back there, I hadn't looked. The history of the Book of Order is always that when there's a change, it's in bold. So that entire section, the D section of the Book of Order, is all in bold. So it is brand new. It does not reflect major substantive changes. There are a few, but it is mostly meant to put it's really interesting. So I kind of said we've put more documents on our desktop, but the new church discipline is actually meant to take stuff that was in different places, that was in the annotated Book of Order, that was in old PJC decisions, and put them in a place that everybody could quickly find them, and the judicial process would make sense to somebody, and you wouldn't have to hire a lawyer just to navigate your way through it. So it's a really interesting tension that we're witnessing. We've got now 7 books on our desk, but one of them they're actually trying to simplify. So anyway, and the others we're making more and more complicated. So those are our foundational changes. Before we go on to the practical group, are there any questions on these?
So Andy, am I understanding correctly, the 12 weeks of paid family leave, the presbytery is going to be working on defining some of that, and that will go out to the sessions or to okay.
Yes.
And
go ahead.
Will there also be something with the anti-racism policy coming out?
Yes, we hope to have some 1 or 2 draft kind of model policies that folks might be able to use. I know of one. I got an email about 4 months ago from a session saying, we're starting our annual policy review and we want to make sure that all these new policies are in place. And I said, wow, you're overachieving. Don't feel like you have to, but if you do come up with something, and I sent them a couple of resources because not very, very few out there, but I said, if you do come up with something, please send it my way. because then we will have something we can share with other people. So,
Thank you.
yeah, Martha.
Andy, I just noticed the language about the paid family leave says for all installed pastors and associate pastors. I suppose that means technically it's not required for contract call pastors. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you have
That is-
guidance on that?
That is so I mean, I think that the intent of the General Assembly was very clear, that we wanted to broaden the church's understanding of family medical leave to and paid to as much as possible. It is not, I can't say, the group from COM that's working on this, I think, has not yet had that conversation. And I think that they will have that conversation about whether they will be recommending this for contract call as well. My sense is it will probably be encouraged. There is another change to deep down in the depths of some of these policies that allows the presbytery to set minimum terms of call for contract calls, which there's been, and for terms of dissolution. So that is a new provision. There's some presbyteries have done it. Greater Atlanta has not. We now have permission, clear permission to do that. We've not made a determination as to whether or not we will. And so I think that's going to be part of that conversation as well. Other questions? We'll flip on over to the practical changes. One of the reasons, the first of these is one of those reasons why I actually pointed out about Robert's rules. So believe it or not, until July 9th, 2023, Robert's Rules of Order was not the default parliamentary guide for meetings of Presbyterian congregations. It was for sessions, but it was not for congregations. So one of the changes that is taking effect as we speak is to establish Robert's Rules of Order as the default parliamentary authority for congregational meetings. And that is being done alongside an authorization of electronic congregational meetings. So this is one of those very fine points of, we just assume that everything has to happen by Robert's Rules of Order. And many of our congregations have it in their bylaws that they function by Robert's Rules. And it's certainly the tradition. And yet, it has not been written down officially until now. Another practical change is very much related to that. It is a provision that all councils and their commissions, that's session, presbytery, synod, and general assembly, may meet electronically. We've been doing this certainly for the last 3 years, many times before that. But some of the people who are pickier than I am about these things wanted to make sure that it was absolutely clear. So they had it written, they had it added to the Constitution to say that you may meet electronically. Couple of pieces about that. Number one, you do not have to meet electronically. Number two, related to that, to meet electronically, you will need to approve a special set of rules for electronic meetings. So the Presbytery has done that. And so our committees, our commissions, and the Presbytery as a whole have the necessary authority to meet electronically. And that has just been reaffirmed by this amendment. So sessions and congregations need to also adopt similar policies and procedures if they've not already done so. If you need resources about how to do that, please let me know. I've got some different models that I can send you. And this one gets to, I think I mentioned this one in the last round, that G30303C authorizes presbyteries to establish minimum requirements for severance packages for temporary relationships like contract call and for certified Christian educators. So some presbyteries have done this in the past, but this clarifies that they do have the authority to do this and encourages presbyteries to set them if they feel that that's important. Greater Atlanta does not have minimum terms of call for any of these areas. The Committee on Ministry is exploring that. It'll be kind of part of our review of the policies. We're kind of taking them one at a time. We've dealt with one of the policies related to boundaries training. We'll get to the other ones in the coming months. Trying to do them orderly, but also kind of sequentially so we can focus. Are there questions on any of these three changes? Chip.
Andy, if I may, I think I know the answer, but the provision that councils and commissions can meet electronically, is it up to the council itself to make that determination?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, the council itself can determine the circumstances under which they will meet electronically. They can author, so you could authorize the moderator to make a particular meeting an electronic meeting. It just need, and you just need a policy or a set of special rules in order to do that. And Robert's rules, and so that's something that's referred to in Robert's rules. So yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, I'll move on to the highly technical ones. Feel free to nod off or whatever. Just make sure you're muted if you decide to start snoring on these. So these are these are the very technical changes. The first of these is to add something that can be done at a congregational meeting. One of the things, if you talk with me and you're asking me something about a congregational meeting, the first thing I will do is turn to G10503 and I will say, what can the congregation do? There used to be 5 things there, and now there is a 6th item there. I believe it's 6. It may now be 7. I'm double checking myself. Yes, it's now 7. The 7th item is to add receiving a disciplinary decision against a church member. So if for some reason a church member is accused of misconduct, the session has a trial, they report that to the congregation at a congregational meeting. G20503 change, I call this very technical. Some people have called this foundational, earth-shattering perhaps, to remove honorably before retired as the category for the role of retired ministers. Does not mean that you will not be honorably retired. We have that option, but we can now put you on a roll without attaching the word honorably to you. I think that's been the biggest concern. This G20505A1 adds a requirement to consult with the community served when receiving immigrant pastors without otherwise acceptable PCUSA ordination educational requirements. Highly technical. A change in G2.10. That's technically, you should say like G2.05 and G2.10, kind of the way that these numbers are intended to be read, to add language clarifying commission ruling elders can be commissioned to more than one validated ministry at a time, or to serve across a whole presbytery, as we have been doing with our own beloved Jane Hubbard. So this just validates the important work that Jane does all the more. G30104 change is another place where somebody thought it was a good idea to add procedures for electronic session meetings. This is the reason why there are 2 amendments related to this, is that there were 2 different committees at the General Assembly that were considering language related to this, and somehow they both came up with language in 2 different places, and they both passed the Assembly and the presbyteries. Something tells me we're going to have an amendment sometime in the next few years to clean this up. So The G30401 is the one I was talking about earlier about synods enrolling those serving in terms and elected offices of the synod as additional members of the synod, so for representational purposes. They weren't able to do that without this amendment to the Book of Order. So, any questions on these technical changes? And Chip, no, we're not taking away your honorably, I promise.
I'm just pleased I don't have to be honorable anymore.
You better watch out. I'll tell. This is being recorded after all.
Okay, that's fine.
Other questions on these? So now to the list of amendments related to sexual misconduct. These are incredibly important amendments. They are highly technical as well, by and large. But they do require some attention in our congregations and especially in the presbytery. The first two of these relate to requirements for those who are preparing for ministry. First, they must have boundary training during the inquiry phase. And the second is that sessions must report to the presbytery any matters of sexual misconduct of those who are enrolled as inquirers or candidates. This is designed to kind of make sure that the broader church is more aware of this concern. Then G2.10 change is to add boundary training to those seeking to be CREs, and G2.11 here adds boundary training requirements for those seeking to be certified as Christian educators. Then finally, related to this, G30106 is that policy section where we added the anti-racism policy, and we've added a harassment policy, but this has also added language regarding boundary training, including child sexual abuse prevention training. So that all now has to be included in the sexual misconduct policy required of councils. I will mention that the Committee on Ministry was already starting to have some conversations about boundaries training for our ministers. The other thing as well that changed here is a requirement for boundaries training every 3 years. 36 months is the language of the book. So recognizing that was coming, and also dealing with a couple of other odd situations that have come up over the years, the Committee on Ministry went ahead and adopted a new policy related to boundaries training that incorporates the every 3-year requirement. And it clarifies that rather than trying to have different tiers of training, you take boundaries 1 and then you can take boundaries 2, and you could go off and find something different. It was just, we were getting far too many questions. It was far too confusing. So we now have just decided all ministers who are active in the presbytery, members at large, validated ministers serving in congregations, even honorably retired who are serving regularly, are required to do boundaries training, a basic boundaries training course every 3 years. If you do boundaries training through your hospital or your seminary or your HOA, great. You're going to get it again through the presbytery. So if you want to maintain your standing your good standing in the life of the presbytery. So, and we've added some additional requirements that if you're not current, then at the end, beginning in 2025, if you are not current, you will not clear any reference checks, and you will not be transferred to other presbyteries or put on the retired roll. You have to do this to stay current with that. It's some teeth we believe we can do that will hopefully encourage people to stay current with their requirements. Advertising plug, The next one of those is scheduled for October, recognizing we're going to have a lot of people wanting to do this in the next 18 months. We've got one in October and we've got 3 scheduled for next year. So, and they're all going to be done on Zoom, 2 hours max. We've tried to make it as simple and straightforward as possible. So not going to be perfect, but we want people to get the basic information they need as a good reminder of what needs to happen. The last sexual misconduct related change is at G40301. This expands and clarifies the confidentiality requirements for ministers and commissioned pastors. It's not, there's not a deep substantive change there, but there was a passionate discussion at the General Assembly last year about the finer points of this language and what should be included there. Any questions on these sexual misconduct amendments? Yeah, Russ. You're muted, Russ.
I thought I had clicked the mouse to unmute. G211. It's not about the sexual misconduct thing, but I'm curious about the language on this. I was curious previously and just never bothered to follow up. Elders seeking to be certified as Christian educators. What are those who are simply coming through to become a certified Christian educator that aren't elders?
That is a good question. So these are summary statements written by a colleague and borrowed freely and should be credited appropriately. I'm doing that now. Thank you, Greg Goodwiller. I believe he did that. And we use these at the Presbytery meeting as well when we do this. That should not be the word elders there. It should just be those seeking to be certified as Christian educators. It's not, it's any person seeking certification.
That was a point of conversation we were having in the pew at the Presbytery meeting as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I should also add, I should have put the disclaimer at the very beginning. What you see on this screen and what you will get in the handout is not the official language. You should always go to the book because the book is going to be right. Although there are errors in the book sometimes. Every page, if you have a copy of the new book, I encourage you to turn to any page before about page 30 and look on, page 26, I think it's the last one I'm seeing it on. And you look on page 26 in the bottom corner, it says Book of Order 2023/2025-26. Because they added the page number at the end of each page reference. So you can flip back a page and it's 2023/2025-24. So go back and it does 22. And it's only on the left side on the even numbered pages. So there are errors in the book. I have not heard of an errata sheet. I don't think they've gotten to that point yet. They've not discovered any, but it has happened before. But that is far more accurate than this. Any other questions on sexual misconduct? On this section, let me clarify that. I'm not sure I'm going to take questions on sexual misconduct. All right, we will move on then to, I'm going to give a very quick overview of the worship amendments. There's an amendment to the section about confession and forgiveness that permits the sacrament of baptism, says that might follow the confession instead of coming after the sermon. There is an addition there, W30409 about the theology of the Lord's Supper. This is kind of the latest phase in our discussion long term about may those who are not baptized come to the table. And so there is another new phrase dropped in here to add when appropriate to offer an invitation to be baptized when someone unbaptized tries to take communion. Ask most ministers, and I think they'll tell you what they do. They would probably get brought up on charges if we were specific about it, but I don't think that's, I'm not sure that they would ever stand in the realities of the church. There's a change to the prayer after communion. Who knew that the prayer after communion could only be offered by a minister of the word and sacrament prior to July 9th of 2023? Otherwise, it was just invalid, according to the Book of Order. So now someone else can do that. W40403 is about the order of worship for ordination and installation services. There's a group of people, probably more on Facebook than anywhere else, who love to talk about whether it's appropriate to lay hands on someone in an installation. And this is related to that, the signs and symbols of blessing. That would be what happens if you're laying hands on someone at an installation service, because you're not supposed to actually lay hands on them. That only happens once. Otherwise, you destroy the ecumenical order. Because there's a lot of these, I'll pause on this screen. Any questions or comments on these four? I should have added also, you're getting clearly my opinion on some of these. But the Directory for Worship is directive in a way that is not always as binding on the broader church as some of the other parts of the Book of Order are understood to be. So we move then to W-5. Quite frankly, again, with all honesty in this moment, I don't know that I've ever looked at the 5th chapter of the Directory for Worship. It talks about household worship and discipleship and pastoral care, these sorts of things. These are not commonly used sections of the Book of Order. So these are some of those changes that are helpful for some people and probably more helpful for those studying our theology in the future than for a lot of the practice of the church today. So I won't even look further at the individual ones there. Any questions on those or comments? I'm going to stop my screen share. Any other questions, any broader questions or comments? Anything that you want to especially hear more about at the later sessions of this? Martha.
Andy, for those of us who weren't at General Assembly when these amendments came through, what can you say about where the biggest changes?
So church discipline got a lot of attention because of its size. Family leave got tremendous attention. There was a lot of conversation about the sexual misconduct ones. This was there was a survivors of sexual misconduct task force that brought most of these changes. They suggested some others that did not pass the assembly, but these were the major ones. And so that's kind of where the assembly spent a lot of its time. I mean, most of the other, the technical ones about Robert's rules and adding electronic meetings, people might have gotten in the weeds of the language of those, but did not get in the weeds of whether it was the right thing to do. Other questions?
I just have a comment. Thank you for the summaries. I will look forward to getting my copy of that so that I really can go with the new book of order and look at it. So I may have questions later, Andy.
Sure.
But at this point, I don't really know enough to ask, I don't think. So
Yeah. Well, and I think, part of this is we all are kind of feeling our way through this. It's not a radically different book of order, except for church discipline. But this feels like a moment when something changed. Part of it is we went for 4 years without any changes. So, there were no amendments that came out of the 2020 assembly for a lot of reasons, related to the pandemic. And so we kind of got a lot of changes that had piled up for this assembly, but so it just feels more momentous that going for this with the same book for 4 years, now we've got to change it. Maybe that's what it's really about. Yeah, Chip.
I have a question. And I'm not sure how I feel about this, so I'm interested in your thoughts. I think for a lot of years, in my experience, there was more and more rule tightening in the Book of Order. And then 2011 was kind of a watershed where we adopted a new form of government and kind of set aside some of those rules and said, let's let churches figure out, or sections figure out how they want to do some of these things. Do you sense that this is a pendulum swinging, and now we're in another tightening of the rules kind of phase to get things, back into a certain place, or do you feel this is more adjusting the screws right or left to get things to where they need to be?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Chip. So one of the way I will read the tea leaves on that is to look at the amendments that came to the assembly. And I think there were as many amendments that were rejected by this assembly as were approved. So, and most of the ones that were rejected, if you read down in them, they were rejected by the comment from the Advisory Committee on the Constitution, the committee of the assembly that deals with these. The repeated comment was, this amendment would make the Constitution a manual of operations. And some of the ones that passed, they said that exact same thing. But what made the distinction was that the General Assembly and then the presbyteries made this determination that there was this real interest and need for the church to have some consistent practice on things like family leave. And I think it's probably going to clarify that we want to build in freedom, but there are certain things that we need to give some clear guidance on, things like family leave, things like how we manage and handle sexual misconduct in the life of the church. There was just too much freedom for presbyteries, sessions, and others to not have the kinds of sexual misconduct prevention that was necessary. And so I think that's what made that shift.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Other questions? Or things that you really want me to make sure I talk about going forward?
I would just say,
Right.
I'm with Patsy. I don't know enough at this point to ask you questions,
Sure, that's fine.
but I may be flooding some questions to your email box even before the next session.
I think I have fielded emails from almost every single one of you on this call at one point or another. And I hope you know that I am happy to do it. That is why I'm here. I actually really enjoy this kind of work. This is part of, kind of figuring out how these changes impact our life together as the church is part of what makes me love being Presbyterian, makes me love doing this work and supporting you all as you do it.
I just wanted to ask a question. I had to miss the very beginning. So
Sure.
I see it's recorded so I can watch the beginning, but because we signed up, are we all going to get the material? You're going to email us some material, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
I
okay.
will send you the PowerPoint, and I will send you that amendment listing that, as we've identified, has a couple of little errors in it. So, and I'll also send you a link to the PDF version of the Book of Order. So if you have not bought your own personal copy yet of, or you're an ebook person now, you can get your paper copy at pcusastore.com. I feel like I'm advertising, but I'll get you the PDF of it as well. What's the other thing I was going to say about that? I want to show, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the annotated Book of Order. Just give you a quick little educational moment. I have it. I'm going to share that part of my screen. So the website is index.pcusa.org. And once you get here, it will have all of these things rolled up. It'll say Constitution of the PCUSA, GA minutes, social policy, and theological statements. So if you click this little arrow next to Constitution, then you'll see the annotated Book of Order 2023. You can expand this down, keep expanding down, and you'll see the different parts of the Book of Order. And so when you get here, you can click on a particular provision of the Book of Order, say G-205, and you will see this is the text of the Book of Order, exactly as you see it in the paper book or the PDF. But then all of these little blue notes are a brief summary of what's called an authoritative interpretation, or when an amendment happened. So this gives some additional insight into what this provision means. So if you're not so sure about what this is trying to say, you can come here, load this up. This is a brief summary but if you click on this green piece, it will take you directly to the full text of the item that was approved by the General Assembly. So you can see the full text as it was approved by the Assembly. And so you can do that on all of these different ones. So it's kind of, I end up in a rabbit hole sometimes. I'll come looking for one thing and then I'll keep reading, and it gets a little bit out of hand sometimes, but it can be a lot of fun. You'll also see, every so often you'll see a different a PJC citation here, and this is what describes how that works. And just to be clear, these are things that are done under G-6.02. And this is where it states that the General Assembly may provide authoritative interpretation of the Book of Order, which shall be binding on the councils of the church when rendered in the manner described in this section, or through a decision of the General Assembly Permanent Judicial Commission. So there's a process by which the Assembly itself can interpret the Constitution, and then that can happen also through a General Assembly PJC decision. So that's what all of these little green links take you to. It's the full text. So you used to have to buy this on a CD or have a big, thick binder full of this, but now you can just go index.pcusa.org. I'll make sure you get that link as well. If you're not quite sure how to find it, or you don't really want to do all the research yourself, I'm happy to do it for you, because I'll end up in a rabbit hole and have fun doing it. So Other questions? Well, I don't want to take any more of your evening than I have already done, although I can tell that you all enjoyed this. Everybody even stayed awake even during the technical and worship parts of this. So I feel like you all have done good things and are wonderfully interested, and I appreciate your interest in it and your being a part of it. Do you want to remind you of the other sessions coming up in the series? We are here with the big picture tonight. August 29th, we're talking about new policies, procedures, and manual items for sessions. So that'll be that boundaries training, that anti-racism policy, those sorts of things we'll be talking about then. On October 3rd, we'll talk about the new requirements for pastors and their congregations, things like the family medical leave. Hopefully we will have a policy that we can share, or at least a draft of it by then. And then on November 7th, we'll look at the new church discipline together. So I have to read it all before then. That's why that one comes last. So any questions or comments on this? Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks be to God for your ministry in the church. And may God bless and keep this work as we learn together in the church in the days ahead. So blessings on your evening. See you soon.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
All right, take care.